You see something like this, it can be kind of hard to tell, but as an anthropologist studying the bones, pathology, looking at everything, we would make that determination, say, this looks like cows, we would go sit where you've seen it.
This Egyptian mummy and coffin came to the Bridgeport Scientific Society in 1894. We're very, very excited about the opportunity to kind of see what she might have looked like, somebody from ancient times. And it's a fantastic opportunity for us. And we're grateful to Joe that he's taking her on.
It takes some of the pressure off where you're not trying to locate a long lost relative, so it's just for a museum, but still it's a face to history, so it's an important story to tell.
People sometimes ask us, how did a mummy and coffin come to be at the Barnum Museum?
The fascination with Egyptian culture goes way back in time. It didn't happen with just King Tut. The Napoleonic campaigns and the excavation of Egyptian tombs, it influenced everything. It influenced dress, it influenced furniture, fashionable tastes at that time. So this goes back to the early 1800s.
It's all driven from their belief that this life it's not the end, that there is resurrection and there is the life after. And also they believe that in this life, after this exact body we are going to use. So this body has to be preserved, has to be beautiful, and has to be also protected with all the charms and the amulets in order to just withstand the journey.
We do know Barnum did have an interest in displaying Egyptian mummies. You see that in the 1840s with his Peruvian mummies on exhibition at the American Museum with the Fiji mermaid. It did make total sense, and it was completely plausible that the Barnum Museum at this moment in time had a mummy. So where did it come from? Mr. Barnum passes away in 1891. His second wife, Nancy Fish, really wanted to maintain his legacy embedded within the museum and was at the opening in 1893.
After Barnum's death, a respectful amount of time later, she decided to go do some world travels. And when she was in Egypt, I'm sure she talked to people about her husband's legacy gift to Bridgeport, the Barnum Institute. As far as we know, the American consulate gave her the coffin and mummy so that she could present them to the Bridgeport Scientific Society. This is right at the beginning of the Barnum Institute's history. We know that they were shipped from Egypt to the United States, and in August of 1894, some of the members of the Scientific Society and the Medical Society unwrapped the mummified body.
That time, the only thing that will fulfill the curiosity of people to see what is inside is just to unwrap.
Also looking for treasures. There would be scarabs, there would be relics, and that was seen as the valuable treasure. Very often in museums all over the world at that time, the human remains were discarded.
That's right.
And the treasures were maintained in the collection, so we're very fortunate.
Absolutely, yeah, there wasn't, for the most part, a lot of respect for the body as a person. They did find this small bead net, no other ornaments that we know of.
This is only 1 year before the X-ray was discovered. This radiation can go through the body and can reveal the unseen without damaging and without the need to unwrap. And believe it or not, because this was a mysterious radiation, it could not be tested first on human. They were tested on ancient Egyptian mummies.
We don't get a lot of information at this time, just what was in a newspaper article. It did say the individuals who were involved in this unwrapping process, but no real record of details that we would like to know. Unfortunately, just have to be satisfied with what the newspaper reported in August of 1894.
That's good. That's a basis for us to start,
Right.
our research. So that's a wonderful thing. There were just files and records on objects that were in different drawers in different places. I had to bring all of that together and then find specifically all of the files that address the mummy's history.
Right.
So this took a lot of time. There wasn't a whole heck of a lot of accessibility to immediate research. So my initial thought was, is this real? We were fortunate to unearth a October 1967 letter that was written to the director, Ken Holmes, and it was sent to a Nicholas Millet. Mr. Millet was asked really to assess the mummy coffin. There have been scholars looking at this. It doesn't appear that any of the language in the correspondence deals with the human remains at all, but it was, can we read anything, the hieroglyphics that are present on the coffin? And what's wonderful, to describe some of the hieroglyphics, he actually drew little illustrations. To me, that's a treasure because he was looking at things so closely. What dawned on me when I came to the museum, none of these scholars really made the connection that, okay, Egyptian relics were an industry throughout the 19th century. Anybody could go to Egypt, pick their coffin, pick their mummy, and put them together, and they didn't start the afterlife together necessarily. If they fit, they went on their way together. And that was really not addressed in the 1960s, early 70s assessment of our object and remains. So there was no way to really say, it's like, well, yeah, the body and the coffin actually are the same, right? So that's another 30 years away from that. But at least this gave us information that there was recognition of the importance of this object in our collection at its time.
This gentleman, Mr. Millet, interpreted the glyphs and gave the museum the name Payib or Paib. And so 1967 is kind of when we say that name was canonized for the remains, the mummified individual, and the coffin. So for decades, this has been Paib.
Paib, a male priest from Upper Egypt from about 2,500 years ago.
Correct.
Died at around 60 years old. That was the story.
Right.
That continued.
So this is, according to this scholar, probably early 26th dynasty.
Mm-hmm.
What we have is what survived that's in museums these days. So there might have been more, and this might be deceptive, but what we have a lot of coffins from around the 25th and 26th dynasty, when the Barnum coffin comes from. And then we have a whole lot more from the Ptolemaic period, which is around 300 BC to 30 BC.
That is foundational for us understanding people's interpretation of what we have here.
The name used to be read as Paib or Paib, which is understandable because this bird right here is Pa, and then we have this thing right here, which is ambiguous, but it looks a lot like a reed leaf, which is the sound E. And then this foot right here is the sound B, so Paib. And Ib is a word. It can mean two different things. It can mean a heart, or it can mean a baby goat, like a kid. Mm-hmm. And because it has this animal tail after it, that would mean we should prefer the baby goat meaning, because this animal tail tells us that whatever is prior to that is somewhat related to animals or to non-human things. The name in the past was interpreted as Paib, but on other coffins, the word Bes, the name of the god Bes, is spelled this way. And in that case, these two symbols are switched and this one is flipped horizontally. So it's a scribal error for Bes that he made it written so that it looked like Ib instead. And one of the ways that I don't think this is Paib is if we look up here at the very top in the word Ipu, this is that reed leaf that is the eye. You can see it's very skinny and a little bit curved and kind of pointy at the top. And that is definitely an E there, Ipu. And then we look at this one and it's rounded at the top and it's not curved at all. So I think it's probably an S character, which is like a folded piece of cloth, and they've just drawn it backwards. This is the owner of the coffin, and if you look at him, he's so cute. He's got his head is bald because he's a priest, and the Egyptians had beliefs that you had to be pure to enter the temple, and part of that being pure was not having lice and being shaved. And so if you see a bald person in Egyptian art, a lot of the times that represents a priest. He's also got this neat robe that comes kind of flowing down his shoulders here. You can't see it very well because of the damage, but that's actually a very unique costume that shows up on other coffins of this type, and I haven't quite figured out what it is, because usually the robe goes in the other direction. It flows from the other shoulder. But he's got his hands raised. He's got little bracelets on his arms and on his upper arm. Those are in blue. And he's got his hand raised and his palms out. And that is a position of worship or adoration. And so the people that he is worshiping are in this scene on the other side of the coffin, Isis and Osiris here. So this picture right here next to Isis actually gives us a lot of information about who Quimbes was and who his family is. And we actually have several generations of his family here. So the discussion about him actually starts right here in this kind of damaged area, and it's hard to see. So when a person died on their coffin, they're usually called an Osiris, and that means that they are in the following of Osiris, but it also serves to kind of associate them with the god. And so you can tell that the name of the deceased is going to start because of this group right here, which is hard to see, which is the name of the god Osiris. It says the Osiris, and then these glyphs are gone. And then you can see this one right at the very bottom. It looks like a wedge through a line. That means stolist. It's really hard to see on this coffin. It shows up on other coffins, which is kind of how I could tell what it was. This is an eye right here. It is a reed leaf glyph. And this is the name of the city of Akhmim. It's Ipu, and half of it's destroyed, but we can see enough of it left to know what it is. So he's a stolist of Ipu. He's a stolist in Akhmim. And this right below here is you can see it's a little crouching jackal. You're gonna have to take my word on this maybe. But it's a little crouching jackal, and he's kind of on a standard. So this is Anubis, the god Anubis. And below that is the word, the mother of the god. So he's a priest of Anubis and the mother of the god, who is Isis, because she's Horus's mother.
There was a very popular National Geographic show called The Mummy Roadshow.
Right.
You know, a couple of scholars traipsing around the world, looking at different mummies and talking about them. It seemed really smart and engaging.
Yeah.
It was always in the back of my head, what are we really looking at here? We emailed them, and not even 24 hours later, we got a response from Ron Beckett and Jerry Conlog that was like, we'll be there tomorrow. And sure enough, they were. You are not gonna believe it. They are bioanthropologists, imaging department at Quinnipiac University, a half mile up the road from the Barnum Museum.
I recall that we had a discussion about what was here, and it suddenly came up, there's a mummy. Everyone was very enthusiastic about having us participate in this.
What we decided to do was create a plan, a smart plan that was going to assess the situation as it was.
Bill and I took care of the X-ray end of things. We primarily used portable equipment to transport the equipment to where the remains were. It's just dangerous to try to move an object like a mummy because they're fragile. So we wanted to make sure they were stable, and the best way to do that is using conventional X-ray. And then Ron would use his endoscope to look inside if there was an opening to see if the interior matched what we were looking at on the X-rays.
Sure enough, the X-rays proved that we were in fact looking at a real mummy. And from that moment, it's like, okay, enough for today.
Our job is to collect data that's hidden within the remains. And what we try to do is get the mummy to tell us their story.
The mummy was transported to advanced radiology in Fairfield, which is just the next town over from Bridgeport.
There was a lot of care into how we're going to transport, so we had to get insurance companies involved. The insurance company basically said, it's like, okay, you want to move this, you need a police escort, and you, meaning me, the curator, was not allowed to leave it.
The radiologist there was taking a look at the radiographs as they were coming up. But Ron and I were occupied with the technologist who was in the process of trying to put together 3D images.
There looked like there were some salt deposits, but there were very distinctive, mummified packages inside the chest. So what's that? That's something that we have to look at more.
The radiologist, who had never seen the inside of a mummy before, thought that a body packet that was kind of cylindrically shaped, the radiologist, who may have gone to the Met or someplace and saw a falcon mummy, thought that this was a falcon. And this he reported to the media.
That intrigued everybody. The media got a hold of that, and that became a headline.
That would be really rare.
That would have been extremely rare.
It stirred up a tremendous amount of excitement. We usually don't go in with any kind of expectations. So we're not looking for anything specifically. We're trying to get just the best possible images that could be used by other experts. We also determined initially that it was a female, that it was not a male. And that was confirmed on the 3D reconstructions, because what we could do is look at the surface of the body.
How we can tell from for example, from the skull, from the size, the smoothness of the bone, the smoothness of the curves, how robust or how delicate the features or the bony features would look like. This would tell you a man from a woman. And the pelvis also the same, especially the anterior part of the pelvis. The cavity has to be wide, the curves has to be wider. So this is the female pelvis that would accommodate a child and would give it a childbirth. But unfortunately, it's not always black and white.
The surface reconstruction of the pelvic region demonstrated without a doubt that this was a female and not a male.
What they also realized during that time, the incisions were in different places. The mummification process did not align with our Coffin story of a 2,500-year-old mummification.
You had a next step.
So we had a next step. So now the plot thickens, right? So now it's like, okay, we're going to do this research. We're going to have so much more knowledge about them. That just took us another level deeper.
Jerry Conlog told me he'd like to know if I would be interested in looking at CT images of a 4,000-plus-year-old Egyptian mummy, and I said, I'll be there today, if you like.
The teeth were in terrible shape. She may have had as many as 17 abscesses that were active at the time of her death. So she had dental pathology.
She had to have been in extraordinary pain, and actually even said it's like with something like that, her breath was probably just horrible. So she was living a hard life.
What I saw was a lot of dental disease, tremendous amount of dental disease. Some of it had gone into the bone. Some of it looked to be diet related. What was very evident was an extraordinary amount of wear of the teeth, particularly in the anterior regions up here. And the wear was all the way down into the pulp chambers. And so that pulp would become exposed to the oral cavity, which is loaded with microorganisms more than any place else in the body. So that's how the pulp was compromised in her. And she had, I don't remember the exact count, but it was double digits of her remaining teeth. She was missing left-sided mandibular molars, and one right-side mandibular molar just had a couple of root pieces left. She was missing about 5-6 teeth, and all the rest of her teeth were badly worn down in the front and all tipped around in the back. So she had what's called a collapsed dentition, which means that her bite would close more than usual, and this dimension of her face would get shorter, and the tissues around her oral cavity would compress, making her look older before her time. But the number of abscesses was really dramatic.
This was by far the worst he had ever seen. Depending on the location of the abscess, that infection could actually migrate to the brain. So an infection in your dentition could actually contribute to your death through septicemia. Blood, the bacteria gets into your circulatory system, to your organs, and it can actually kill you. So we don't have a hard, fast, this is what caused her death. but there's strong circumstantial evidence that this contributed to her death. Now, one of the things that happened back in 2006, the mummy was scanned using protocols or procedures that would have been used on a live patient. If you're doing a live patient, you want to minimize the amount of radiation to the patient because radiation can be harmful. Instead of taking thin slices, you take thick slices. You only can get certain representations within a slice. If you take thinner slices, you can get a better representation as to what's located within that section of tissue. When we went in 2006, we had no control over the protocols that were used. But when Quinnipiac got the CT scanner in 2009, one of the things we wanted to do is develop CT protocols that could be used on mummified or skeletal remains. So there were two reasons why we were very anxious to redo the mummy at the Barnum. First of all, to take a look with higher resolution, but also to develop techniques and procedures, protocols, that could be used in other locations in the country or around the world for mummified remains. So it was very important for us to get this mummy back. However, the mummy was done. Why would we do this over? The bird was the hook. So just because the radiologist said there was a bird in there and that created a media storm, it provided us the opportunity in true Barnum fashion to re-examine the mummified remains to see if there was actually a bird there. We knew there wasn't a bird in there, but we were going to use that as the hook to be able to re-examine this mummy.
They came back and it literally it's like, you know, we have an opportunity. So can we do it again? So similarly, we went through the same process, reaching out. The first thing you do is make sure the insurance company will allow you to transport the object, and they agreed, same thing, police escort, can't leave it. This time though, what was interesting is because the media interest in this had grown, we had an entourage of cameras following our little convoy with, photographing the mummy, right, all the way up to the Quinnipiac campus. There was a little bit of disappointment because there was no need to take her out of the packaging. So everything was packaged very carefully, but because the scanning equipment is so high res, it could go right through. So there were some people who were disappointed. They wanted to actually see the mummy, but for us, it's like, if we don't have to do this, we don't do it. So we went ahead and we did that. We were able to go through it and scan. It was, oh my goodness, what did we get? 60,000?
80 slice or something like that?
It was extraordinary.
Far finer slicing than the previous one done in 2006, which means you getting clearer images. Jumping ahead to December of 2018, our friend Jerry Conlog approached us with an idea. I will never forget the day I came into work looking at my email, my inbox, and I found an email that had the subject heading, "Looking for skulls." Kind of woke me up. It was really an attention grabber. So, what was really being asked or sought was not skulls per se, but high resolution imaging data that could be used to replicate, to make 3D prints of skulls.
If we look, the initial images that were collected in 2006 were not as high a resolution. Once we got those images in 2009, we were able to get this great 3D reconstruction for the dental pathology. But at that time, we could not have done a 3D printing of the skull because the technology wasn't there. We had to wait a few more years, and in 2019, Joe Mullins at the Center for Missing and Exploited Children was willing to do a 3D reconstruction, but he needed a skull to be printed.
He works for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in Virginia, but he does come up to New York once a year to teach a workshop at the New York Academy of Art. Sure enough, we were able to have a 3D skull print made, and that became the basis of this clay bust. The opportunity to see what our young woman actually had looked like, or a very close approximation, scientifically done, just blew our minds.
Most of the cases I deal with are unidentified remains from ME's offices across the U.S. dealing with the worst case scenario, homicide victims, unidentified, that kind of thing. But this one, doing the historical cases, it's a little bit of it's less pressure going in. This is not for identification or to solve a mystery of who done it. It's still a face to our history that I still have to accurately portray. Making sure I have all that information, as much details as all the history behind where it came from and time frame to help do some research, make sure I still have to represent who she was, 4,000 years ago, what she looked like, and put in the face to that history. So just having all those details, the age range, male or female, characteristics from the face, like how that would portray into the soft tissue, have all that laid in front of me so I can start the process and rebuild the face.
Placement of the eyes in the orbits, the nose, the ears, the lips. Forensic anthropology is based on kind of majority rules. Now the features that we've come up with, we're going to put the eyes, the ears, the nose is based on the skull. We have your measurements and procedures to put those features back on there. This is the parameters you have to work within. The projection of your nose is based on your nasal spine. If you push up on your nose, you feel that bone right there. That's like an arrow to tell us where your nose is pointing. Your finger, stick it on your eyebrow, and your thumb at the base of your nose. And if you roll that back, that should be about how tall your ear is. Whether you have attached or detached earlobes is based on your mastoid process, where this is pointing. Your eyebrows, you'll follow this upper rim of the orbit. We don't know if this person was 95 pounds or 200 pounds, so we have to kind of go right down the middle.
You don't really think of it as a person. When we looked at that dental pathology, everyone kind of winces a little bit, but you still don't connect it to being a person.
We were going to have finally an idea of what a woman who lived 4,000 years ago looked like.
This has been years of work and research and caring and being committed to this particular artifact, and then to a life story.
Once Joe Mullins put a face on that individual, now this was someone that I could relate to. She looked like another person, not just a mummified, dried up individual that may have been on display.
It's really transformed our interpretation of her. She was largely treated as an object.
Yeah.
Now she could be interpreted more as an individual who had a life, in the very distant past, but this was a human being who had a life.
From day one of her birth, she's accepted, she is pampered, she is loved. This is a community that is full of life.
It was an extraordinary moment to actually see something more.
So we ended up choosing the name Ippy, I-P-Y. Helps to give her personal identity. Of course, we will never know exactly who she was, but being able to talk about her by name instead of just the mummy is very important too.